All right, I have 2 o'clock, so I am calling this policy committee meeting to order. There are 3 items on the agenda which are all closely intertwined. I will say we have, I think the initial effort at trying to justify this didn't roll out very well. And we have worked to backtrack and make sure that employees have been heard and listened to. I know Dr. Kraus, you have had conversations and or met with all of the employees for which this directly impacts, correct?
5 of the 7, they were all invited. I spoke with 2 individually. We spoke with 4 as a group. The meeting you attended, one of those was the second time she had been involved. One of the people is resigning, and I assume therefore was not interested in attending, and the other, I never heard back one way or the other.
Okay. But all of the employees that were directly impacted here have had the opportunity to meet in person by phone or
Person or as a
something.
group, yes.
Yes. So just want the minutes to reflect that, Donna, in case there's any questions that come up a little bit later on. One of the biggest things that we have to make sure that we are doing is that we are in compliance with Missouri statute and the Fair Labor Standards Act. So, Dr. Kress, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point to kind of explain that part and through the conversations that we've had, what you're suggesting to recommend to the board.
As Mrs. Witham said, I did offer the opportunity to all these employees that were affected to meet with me as a group. 4 of them took me up on that meeting. 2 others said, hey, I can't come that time. Can I meet with you individually? So I had 2 individual meetings as well. As I said, one of the employees that I did not meet with is resigning, so I assumed that she was not interested in meeting, and the other one just I did not hear from, but I know she was invited. The packet of materials that I gave you, I'll just go through. If you keep them in the order that I handed them to you, that'll make the most sense. I believe there are some points of law that we need to take into consideration, and then I'll follow that up with some recommendations. In terms of the points of law, Missouri Statute 168.303, which became effective August 28, 2003, which incidentally that was before job sharing was ever put together or was started in this district. And board policy GB2, part-time and substitute employment, says that any employee supporting a full-time position other than 2 teachers, each working at least 17 but not more than 20 hours, will be classified as part-time employees. Those are sheets 2 and 3 of the packet that you were given. Sheet 2 is the statute language. As you can see at the top, it was effective August 28, 2003. And the part in yellow highlighting indicates that job sharing shall not include instructional support or school services positions, including but not limited to guidance counselor, media coordinator, psychologist, social worker, audiologist, SLP, and nursing positions. The page following that is the accompanying board policy GB-2, and it has the same language highlighted in yellow on your sheet as well. Point 2 on the points of law, based on the provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act, this was verified by our attorney. In the email, that's page 4 of your packet. It says that non-instructional employees employed on a part-time basis must meet the salary test to be classified as exempt. If they don't, they're classified as non-exempt under the law. The highlighted portion of that email from February 9th says, if that employee group is not making at least $35,568 annually, regardless of how it is paid, then they are non-exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. Moving along to the third point.
I'm going to stop you for a second. Can you give a little bit more, a better more detailed explanation of the exempt versus non-exempt. That's where I think sometimes people get a little confused.
Basically, the basic difference, just to boil it down to a very rudimentary topic, is are employees entitled to overtime or are they not? Exempt employees are exempt from that overtime provision, meaning myself as a salaried employee, any of our teachers, if we work 70 hours in a week, we get paid the same as if we work 37 and a half, which is what we're contracted for. So anybody who is exempt status, overtime rules do not apply. To non-exempt employees, it depends on if they're salaried or hourly, but the overtime rules do apply to them in that case. So that's the basic difference between exempt and non-exempt. Did that?
Yes.
Okay. The third point, based on the provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act as verified by our attorney, and that email is the next one in your packet. Instructional employees employed on a part-time basis retain their exempt status under the law. The underlying portion says, because the salary, I'm going to read the sentence before that. Specifically, the salary and salary basis tests do not apply to teachers if their primary duty is to teach, which all of the individuals in question, instruction is their primary responsibility. Because the salary and salary basis tests do not apply to teachers, part-time teachers are still exempt from Fair Labor Standards Act overtime requirements. So those are the 3 points of law that I feel like we need to keep in mind. Are there any questions from anybody about those before
No.
we move into recommendations?
But in your meetings with individuals, that has been clearly explained.
As clearly as I was able, yes.
And so these people understand, for example, sometimes some of the semantics have been, we've been job sharing for this long. Well, you've made it work, okay, but by law, you have to clock in and present certain hours. So
Well, the
those
clocking in and out,
provisions have been explained.
yes, and the clocking in and out is a separate issue. That's a peer's requirement. They have to be able to be eligible for peers retirement system. An employee has to work a minimum of 20 hours per week, and they have to be able to verify that. They can't just say, yeah, I'm part-time, I work 20. They have to, the business office has to be able to verify that to peers. Okay, so that's kind of a separate issue.
But that has been
This has all been
explained
explained, yes, several
to
times.
the employees. Okay.
Dr. Kraus, you said
I have
something, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tanya.
I have a question, and it could be that I'm just not properly understanding everything, but their jobs as it is, it is okay according to these statutes and the law, right? I mean, it's no change.
Part-time employment is fine, and we're not suggesting any change to their job.
Just the ones who job share?
Uh,
Or,
Technically, they are not job sharing
Right.
because they're not eligible for job share. They are
Okay.
part-time employees, and I'm not suggesting any change
Yeah.
to their duties, that they would be continued to allow, they would be allowed to continue in that same capacity.
do you know if they were like hired under the intention to job share? Or, I mean,
I don't know what the intent was back in 2006. All I know is that it was illegal at its inception, and to call it a job share. And when we find out about those things, I think it's good for us to correct them.
because my question is, if they were job sharing and it's not legal, why was it allowed all this time?
That's a really good question.
Excellent question.
Because I think that that's my main issue, is that if it is not legal, but they were told it was okay to do all this time, and we're trying to correct it now, but I understand that. But if I had taken a job, told I was gonna job share, and then now after, 15 years, 12 years or whatever, told you're not able to do that. I mean, I can understand being upset about it.
Nobody is telling them that they're not able to do that. The only difference is other than being called a job share, it will now be called part-time. There is absolutely no difference otherwise. Not a single thing.
So none of this really will affect them directly except for what we call it.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Mhm.
Just a word change?
Yes.
And how does this affect, how does this correlate, I guess, with leave time or?
That's in the recommendations. I'll get to as we come through.
Okay.
That's the part that
Yeah.
has been the sticking point.
That was, I think, without a doubt, for all of them, the most important
Right.
factor. And like I said, if you can bear with me a few minutes, I'll get to that here in the recommendations.
I'll be patient.
I think there's two things. Number one, it's the semantics between job share and part-time.
Right.
That's created the issue. No matter what they called it in 2006, it's still part-time employment, no matter what you want to call it, because they're all working in a part-time position. They're not doing anything other than part-time. So job share, part-time, really doesn't make that big a difference, in my opinion, because it's really part-time work. The other question, I guess, is I thought I heard you say that the majority of the folks were teachers. I thought there
No.
were 3 or 4 of them were nurses.
No,
The majority of
if
them
I
are
said,
not
if I
teachers.
said that, I misspoke.
Maybe I heard you wrong, maybe.
Yeah.
3 teachers and 4 nurses.
Okay, and that was my understanding, is that, and so maybe you said a majority of them are not, and I just didn't hear the not part of it. Because I thought I heard you say something about a majority of them were instructional in nature.
No, I said that the 3 teachers were exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act because they are instructional in nature.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say. And
Okay. Just me, I probably didn't hear it, so that's why I wanted to make sure I understood it.
Yeah. Anything else before we go on to the recommendations? Okay, my first recommendation, that employees working less than 30 hours per week that do not meet the requirements for job sharing as described in the statute that I showed you, and board policy GB2, part-time and substitute employment be classified as part-time employees and therefore are not eligible for benefits or paid employee leave. That is consistent with all of our policies. Just based on that bullet, the only difference to the employees in question would be that their job would be called part-time rather than job share. That's the only difference that would be brought up by this bullet point. And that would put us in compliance with the statute and our board policy. Bullet 2, that we follow the provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act in determining whether an employee is classified as exempt or non-exempt. I mean, in my mind, this is a no-brainer. The Fair Labor Standards Act is federal law. We have to follow it, pure, plain, and simple. We have an opinion from our attorney saying that the part-time nurses in question are non-exempt employees and that the 3 teachers in question are exempt employees. And therefore, I feel like that to follow the law, we have to classify them in that manner. Any questions on that? The third bullet, that all current employees who have earned leave as full-time employees before moving to part-time status be allowed to use that leave for appropriate reasons listed in board policies GCBDA and GDBDA. This has been the main thing, and I think this is the compromise that we offer to those employees. That was what was identified by all of them, I think, Ms. Wickham,
I agree.
as the most important thing to them, that they be allowed to continue to use the leave that they have accrued. So my recommendation is that we allow them to do that. So again, that makes no change to what they're currently doing. The fourth bullet, that the leave of said employees, which was earned in days, be proportionately reduced by their current percentage of full-time status, as has been consistently done with other similarly situated employees. This goes back to the idea of equity and equal treatment for employees, and I know I've spoken with several of you about this. Leave in this district is earned in days. It's accrued in days. If you go from full-time status, which board policy defines as 30 hours per week or more, and you go to something less than that, then it's proportionately, has been proportionately reduced. Sorry, let me rephrase that. The two issues that I can think of, the two instances, we had 2 employees move from 8 hours per day to 7.5 hours per day. Those are both full-time because they're both more than 30-hour positions. We proportionately reduced by 1/16, or about 6.36%, the amount of hours in their leave banks to get them from 8 hours per day to 7.5. We've had nutrition services people in the past who have moved from either 7 or 7.5 down to 6. We did the same thing with those. So I believe it's only fair and equitable to do the same thing with these employees. They still have the same amount of days left in their banks. So that would be a recommendation. The next bullet, beginning July 1, 2022, which incidentally, that's when I would recommend that any policy change that we make take place. That all employees classified as non-exempt be required to use employee leave to be paid for absences falling under scenario A of the inclement weather policy. Scenario A of the inclement weather policy says that that's the class is canceled, but the district is still open. There are several employee groups that are required to come to work on those days. Basically, it's all 260 or all 12-month employees. Anybody else who is non-exempt status is required to either be asked by their administrator to come in and work, their supervisor, use a day of their employee leave so that they can be paid, or be docked. And that is true from start to finish with all of our non-exempt employees. And that's what I'm saying, we should treat everybody in that job class the same. And that final one, that the recommended changes to board policies GCBDA and GDBDA be approved as presented. The last 2 pages in your packet, GCBDA and GDBDA, if you remember anything that has a C in it, that's the second letter, that's the certified version, and if it has a D, that's the classified version. So you can see in red print on the front page, that wording is identical to what you originally passed in November, with the exception that it says beginning July 1, 2022. So that says when a full-time employee transfers to part-time. So the idea of grandfathering that wording, that beginning July 1, 2022, automatically would have that effect with those 7 employees, because they obviously were already in a part-time position prior to July 1, 2022. So I don't, that wording, I believe, would take care of the issue. And then on the back page of both of those, there's a sentence about people who are with us just for a very short time not being eligible for leave buyback, and I don't believe there was any negative discussion about that.
I didn't hear any pushback on that piece at all.
Well, yeah, and when it was originally
Right.
presented. So, in as concise a manner as I can put it to you, that's what I believe the law says and what I would recommend that the board do. Are there any questions that I could answer for you, or concerns that you have?
Yeah, I have a couple. So, I guess my concern is the same concern that I've always had, so I'll just restate it. But I agree with you that it should be reduced proportionately. The only part I don't agree with is that it's not what they were promised when they initially went to part-time. So that would be my only concern with that.
Okay.
Do we have anything in writing that guarantees them that, though? I mean, that may be,
What do you mean?
I understand that's what they're saying they were promised, and I believe that that's the case, but I don't know that we've got anything in writing contractually that obligates, unless I'm mistaken, that obligates the district to uphold that. There's a lot of things that get promised that, 5, 10 years later,
And I guess,
struggle to happen, so.
yeah, a couple of things, David. Number one, as a stated, leave is earned in days. And if they're proportionately decreased, they will still have the same amount of days of leave. So I don't think, in that sense, they're losing anything. Secondly, board policies change all the time, and I'm not aware of any single event where we've said, we're going to grandfather this group in. You know, it's similar to when the tax rate changes, they don't say, well, you paid taxes in 2021, so you get to keep the old rate. Or when the speed limit changes, you were driving before that, so we're not going to hold you to that standard. Things change all the time, and people are expected to adjust to the new system. In the grand scheme of things, they are still getting a benefit that no one else gets. And I don't think we need to give them additional things that other people don't get. Everybody in the last 6 years, and I don't know how far prior to that, when they've changed from full-time to less full-time, you know, from 8 to 7.5, 7.5 to 6, whatever, have always had their hours proportionately changed. The fact that this didn't come to our attention until now, I don't think, you know, should mean that we don't go ahead and make that change. You know, if at some point in time they would decide, any of them could decide, hey, I'd like to work full-time now, then they would be changed back, you know, they would be increased to the same amount or per hours that they're working.
Yeah, and the way you explained it makes perfect sense to me. That's just the only issue that I have with it. It's just that initially they were promised something that taken away. And I understand policies change. This one in particular seems to hit home a little bit more. Just because we've had specific incidents in emails about how it has affected people, particularly a young lady that was pregnant, for example, or anyone not being able to use their leave time for any medical reasons or anything like that as well.
But this takes care of that.
Well, it takes care of it, but, I'm sorry.
Those things have all been allowed, David. She still was able to take her full maternity leave. Nobody has been negatively affected by this.
So I
If
guess
no
what
one's
I see.
negative- Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
If no one's negatively unaffected, then why are they upset?
My personal opinion would be that they expect preferential treatment for some reason.
Like, but you mentioned that their jobs and their days and everything are not changing, right?
That's correct.
If there's no change in their jobs or their days, then what's the problem?
I have no idea.
Perception.
What do you mean?
I think it's their perception they're being penalized. That's the way I see it. And I would say, with a small number of employees, because this impacts just a very small number, I think the smarter thing would have been to have sat down with all those employees before this ever came to the board. That didn't happen, so we're backtracking. All employees have been spoken with, heard, and this is the best compromise to put us legally in line, which we haven't been for many, many years, and allows them access to their leave bank.
So my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the leave aspect of it is not a part of the legal aspect of it, is it? Or is that?
It would be illegal to grant continued accrual of leave for somebody who didn't meet the requirements for job share. We're not talking about that, so no. So in terms of, is it illegal for us to allow them to continue to use their leave? No, it's not illegal. Do I think it's best practice? No. But I think the best compromise, because that's the area that had the highest anxiety ranking, I think, for the employees in question, would be to allow them to go ahead and use them. But to make sure that in our policy we say, moving forward, you change from full-time to part-time, your days get banked and you can buy them out you'll get paid out for them when you retire from the district. But no,
Have
as
we-
far as,
I'm sorry.
as far as it being illegal to allow them to use it, no, it's not a legality issue.
Have we asked these employees how they feel about this compromise?
I think from the conversation on Friday, I think that, well, I know that the idea of being able to use or not use their leave was the most important thing to them. So I think they will see being able to use their leave as a plus, yes. And there was one member who was fairly vocal about not having their leave proportionally diminished, and when I asked that person, can you give me a reason why you should be different, I didn't get any reason. So I think they understand that that is fair.
Diminished how? Did I
By-
miss that part?
If you move from 7.5 hours to 4 hours, you would, that's 53.3, I believe, percent of what you were working. So if you had 1,000 hours, you'd end up with 553, but it's the same number of days. That's what I was talking about in the third bullet from the bottom.
So basically what he's saying is if I was an employee and I had earned 100 days of leave and those 10 days of leave, and those 10 days of leave equated to 10 hours a day, that's 100. Now I go to 5 hours a day, I get 50. So I still get my same number of days covered based on the percentage of what I'm working. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah,
I think that's
and
what he's
because the days are earned, the leave is earned in days, not in hours. Oh, Mr. Reader? Mr. Crouch?
So, yeah.
So in the inverse then, as you stated, would be
Yes.
true. If they went from 5 hours a day up to 10 hours a day, that leave bank then would increase.
I'm not sure we're going to get many takers on 10 hours a day.
No, but for round numbers and for an English person here, it's, round numbers are nice.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the rationale for it, and unfortunately, distributed. My only disagreement is, I just think, from my perspective, they were promised this, and maybe we did roll it out wrong, but that wouldn't be their fault. So I would still be in favor of grandfathering in those same employees for this particular scenario. Doesn't mean we do it for every policy change, but this one seems to have impacted some of our veteran employees negatively, and I would be in favor of trying to.
But the way he's explained it, they are grandfathered in.
They are
They're just-
grandfathered in.
They are gonna get to use they're not, the only thing that they're losing is going from 100 hours to 50 hours if they're a
Yeah.
part-time person. So they're still getting the same number of days. Otherwise, they're doubling up.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's, so if I went from a 10-hour day to a 5-hour day, now I can have twice as many
Right.
leave days as what I had initially earned. That
Yeah,
makes sense what I'm saying?
I understand that. I understood it the first time.
Okay, but they are still being grandfathered in, they're still gonna get to be able to use their leave,
I understand.
just at so I guess when I heard you say they're not being grandfathered in, they
I think
really
I know
are.
what you mean, David. I mean,
Well, they are from our
What you're saying.
perspective, but from their perspective, they're not getting what they were initially promised when they went from full-time to part-time. So,
They were initially promised X amount of leave days per year, and that's what they will still have. If we don't do what you're suggesting, they'll have twice that amount.
I think it's definitely a matter of how you explain it, because every time you guys explain it, I keep saying I understand it.
I guess what's hard for me to understand, David, is I understand that you want to treat them equitably, but you're giving them additional on top of that, when they probably shouldn't have anything.
And I'm at a point of, and maybe this is my middle school teacher background, but we need to be fair and equitable to everybody. but we also need to be careful about what precedent we set moving forward. You know, I think about kindergarten, or not just kindergarten, but elementary classrooms and recess. And you've got to be careful what you promise and/or take away, and you can't. I just think we've got to be very, very careful. That's why we are in charge of setting the policy. We're getting it out clear, it's clearly spelled out. The particular employees in question proportionally will have access to the exact same amount of days that are in their bank now, only it's proportional. That's a benefit that the other part-time employees don't have. We've got a lot of good veteran teachers and veteran employees. But the minute you start making exceptions here, there, here, and there, and here, and there, then we have a spider web mess. We have policies for a reason. It's up to us, to the board, to set clear policy, adopt clear policy. I think this is very clear. It compromises with these employees, and it clearly states this takes effect July 1st.
Question. They earned days, not hours, right?
Correct.
Okay, but if a person has earned 100 days and then they went part-time, they would now have 50 days, not 100?
No, they'd still have 100 of the days of the length that they are now working. So if they had 100 days at 7.5 hours, that would be 750. And if they went to 6 hours a day, they would have 100 days at 6 hours, which would be 600 hours.
I think that the confusing part is adding in the hours. If it's only measured in days, it's if I work 8 hours or if I work 4 hours, if I've got 100 and you've got 100, only I'm working 2 times as many hours. All I'm looking at are like our days, I'm not looking at our hours. Am I looking at it wrong or correct?
I'm not sure I followed what you were saying.
It's both, and that's part of, having been here now 4 years, that's part of the confusing part. Most districts don't give their leave in hours. Most districts give their leave, at least in my experience, as half day or full day, based off of whatever your day of work is. Here we give that in hour increments. So you do earn so many leave days, but it's given in hours.
But you earn it in hours.
Yeah.
For
Which is
whatever your
confusing.
schedule is.
Latonya had kind of a historical perspective on how that began. 4 or 5 years ago, shortly after I got here, employees were complaining about, I had to go have a blood draw at 8 in the morning. I was at work by 8:30, but I had to take a half day leave. And that's not fair, which I agree, it wasn't fair. They only missed probably 45 minutes to an hour and had to take a full day. So we changed the policy at that point to say, you'll be charged for the amount of hours. We said a minimum of an hour. We're not going to say, well, you missed 15 minutes, but it's a minimum of an hour, and then in 15-minute increments after that. We believe that was a perk for our employees, so that if they missed an hour, that's all they were charged for, not a half day. Or if they missed 4 hours instead of a full day, they were only charged for 4 hours. And so that's how that came about historically. The leave is still awarded in days, but we break it down to hours so that they're only charged for what they actually miss.
Then I think that is where the confusion arises, to me, really, is if they earned it as an 8-hour employee. And if you're mentioning hours, and then I'm only working 5 hours now, every day that I take, I'm potentially missing 3 hours. Or maybe I'm just looking at it wrong, I don't know. But I think that the hour-day thing is confusing, to me anyway. And if I'm confused, I mean, I get why other people would be confused. But and you spoke to these guys last week?
Yes, Friday, I believe, wasn't it? This week.
You were there too?
I asked to be included because, so I could listen. It wasn't an official policy committee meeting.
So I understand, I have no confusion about it. I just, forgive me if I don't agree. Not personal, I just don't know if I necessarily agree.
I understand.
Don't see that.
This is it. I know you're a little late to the,
I guess the items B and C on the agenda, or 2 and 3, are the policies with the revised wording. Did anybody have any issues with that? This is, like I said, it's what you approved in November with the addition of beginning July 1, 2022. That way, anyone who would choose to go from a full, from a benefit earning position to a non-benefit earning position would know that up front.
Yeah, I'm okay with this.
I think the date change is good going forward. I mean, things like this just can't happen.
Herein lies the problem, and I've been dealing with it for 40 years, and I think Laura maybe touched on it. And you as board members will hear it at some point if you haven't already. People come to me and say, well, I was promised, I was told this was gonna happen. I'll use when we were going through the discussion about property and high schools and all that stuff. Well, somebody came and said, well, this area of town was promised that they were going to be able to go to this school for fruition. And my response is, I didn't promise you that. And I can't, if you have to redraw boundaries in your community, I can't go off of promise, but I have to go off of presenting the information that follows guidelines, follows law, follows what we have to do to make things different. So nothing against the folks who were promised, but the people that promised them
aren't here.
aren't here. And when those people were leaving, then they should have either gotten something in writing or they should have done something. I'm not a person who's going to promise somebody something without following up in a black and white letter that says, here's what I said, here's what was going to happen, now you have it. So that there is that paper trail. And neither Brian or I were here when any of those conversations took place. We're thankful for what the people are doing. The challenge is, I can't go back and say what superintendent said it or that they got something in black and white. And you'll run into those situations if you haven't already, because a lot of people, I think in the past have been promised something. I don't go around and promise stuff to people. And if I do say it, we can put it in black and white.
Did they accrue time in the normal way this past school year?
None of them accrued any time because they're part-time and don't meet the requirements to accrue leave.
Did it not? Okay, I see. I just answered my own question.
It's just been their use of time.
Yeah,
to take
it's been their
anything out.
use of
It's not
time.
been the rule.
But they've been using it like,
They have been using it this year like they have in past years and would continue to for the remainder of their time with us if you accept the recommendation that I suggested.
Any other comments or questions? Ken?
I have some questions. I mean, this conversation right before I got in here was about those 7 employees.
Correct.
Okay, so what did we end up doing? Are we going to grandfather those 7 and then effective July 1st, you're going to go ahead and,
Yes, this bullet would say that.
are there any notes off the meeting on Friday? Or anything, are there like any notes or anything from that? Or are there none?
I didn't take any notes. It
It
wasn't
was-
an official meeting of
It
any
wasn't
sort.
an official meeting.
That seems like the kind of attitude, confusion, and maybe lack of agreement, because it's one of those situations, again, where all this kind of heard at a different time. But I thought the most part of this subject was about those 7 people. They did get grandfathered exactly like they wanted.
Yes, that third
Okay.
bullet.
And so now from July 1st, third bullet, and from July 1st, then everybody will operate under this
From
new
July
policy.
1st, if the board approves this, then they would not, if they move from full-time to part-time, they wouldn't be able to use any leave.
Well, I think that's part of the argument. They got grandfathered in, but it wasn't exactly what some of them feel as if they were promised.
That's why I wonder if it's changed from what they wanted a little bit or what.
Slightly changed.
Prorated. So using tens as whole numbers, if they had a 10-hour day and they earned 10 leave days, and now they're working 5 days, proportionally, it tweaks down to meet or to match what they're working. Now, if they were to go full-time and they had 5, then it would be double to 10.
Most of the time, we're dealing with people going from full-time to part-time, right? Have you had very many instances where you go to?
There aren't very many of either.
Yeah.
I would say it's probably a 2-to-1 ratio of people going from full to part as opposed to the
I see.
other way. Yeah, I mean, right now only have 7 people out of 1,500 employees, so
Right.
it's not common.
Right. So that's why I thought, just with those 7, we should grandfather them totally what they requested. I think that's what, David, you're having a little bit of a thing about. It's
Well, yeah,
not
that's-
like they wanted.
I totally agree with moving forward exactly how Dr. Kraus stated
Right.
the recommendations.
Yep.
Just the only part that I had an issue with was, you know, I see how it could be problematic if it was a policy we were sticking with as of now, but for the previous employees who've already gone from full-time to part-time, and they were under the understanding that if they did, they would have X amount of days, and we're cutting them in half proportionately, which makes sense, but it's just not it's not the understanding they had when they went from full-time to part-time.
So David, as a classroom teacher, I worked under more than one principal, okay? So under principal A, maybe I had a promise from that principal that the next year I could teach AP 8th grade English, okay? That was what was promised to me. Well, that principal moves on, gets a different job, we have a new principal. Does that new principal need to adhere to, in creating a schedule, what the previous principal promised me?
Probably not.
That's where we are
But
here.
what's new about this year, I mean, all of us are new, but you guys aren't, and they've been using them like everybody else, right?
But that principal also has the opportunity to grandfather you in if they so choose. And that's what we're talking about.
If there was enough students in the schedule, if,
Yeah, it's a
those
if.
are a lot of ifs.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, if it was a verbal promise from this principal, the incoming principal has nothing that binds,
Correct.
is binding. And that's the exact same situation we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So I guess my question would be this, do you think that they were promised that they would get to be able to use double the number of days as everybody else?
Probably not.
I think that they were promised to
That
be
they
able
would
to
get-
use what they earned, and they have been using it just like normal all these years, right?
Well,
It's been no change.
they've been using it.
They've been
with-
getting double the impact all these years.
Right.
Right.
They've had the opportunity to utilize more time than anybody else in the district. So they actually been doing something differently than everybody
Right.
else.
Just these 7, or was it one time it started at 20 and now we're down to 7?
My understanding is it's just
Just
7, I don't know. if
Okay.
there are more.
So
And it was allowed until this year, pretty much.
It was only discovered this year, LaTanya.
It wasn't,
As soon as we discovered it, we acted on it. we can't act on something that we're not aware of.
I know, but my point is that it's not as if there was like a change in anything. You guys just caught the mistake, but nobody knew it was a mistake until you caught it.
But don't you think we have the responsibility, once we find it, to correct it?
Going forward, yeah.
Yeah,
And
but
that's what I'm talking about.
That's
is-
what they're doing.
these folks get to operate though, like what they've been operating in. It's not their fault there was a mistake, right, Tanya? It's not their fault. So
Yeah,
they shouldn't be punished for other people's oversight or missight.
No, I don't think Dr. Kraus is saying it was their fault.
No,
No, absolutely not.
I see both sides of it. I just lean toward the side of accommodating the employees that this affects, that had no knowledge that there was going to be a policy change, and they were under the understanding that they would have X amount of hours when they went from full-time to part-time. Again, it's not personal. It's just, I see it this way.
And I guess the only other example that I would give, and you know, this happened since I've been here and we caught it, an employee was paid incorrectly. They got an extra credit on their years of experience, or they got extra credit on their paycheck because of education, so it moved something. So they got their first paycheck and got paid more than they were supposed to. Well, we find it, we go back and correct it. We didn't penalize them and say, hey, you gotta pay us back the extra, whatever, it was a clerical error on our part. We found it, we fixed it, but moving forward, here's what we're doing. And I think that's what Brian is trying to say, is he found the error and mistake, and he's trying to correct it moving forward. And I guess the way I look at it, and again, everybody looks at it differently, they're not really being penalized in any way, shape, or form. They're still getting to use the same number of days. Instead of talking about hours, they're still getting to be able to use the same number of days that they had. They're not losing the ability to get paid for the days that they had. All they're losing is the ability to double up on the number of days that they had, which I don't think is what your intent would be. That's just my opinion, you know, that's my opinion. I don't think you would double up on pay for people.
Okay, any other questions?
just to the point where you were saying, it sounds like Tanya maybe, or would I like to know that they could ask to sit in on these type of meetings. I've asked to sit in on the professional development and the salary committee, but kind of soundly rejected the opportunity, so this adds to the confusion and stuff, I think. When we come, we'll all hear it at a different time.
I was pretty sure, Mr. Reader, that I invited you personally to the salary committee and that you didn't attend. Am I mistaken in that?
No, you did invite me.
Okay, well, you're welcome anytime.
Any other questions?
I think I personally agree with most all of this, but I personally don't have a recommendation as far as should we have the same rule for the previous employees? And quite honestly, I think I need time to think about it.
Well, and you have time to think about it, so this doesn't have to be voted on tomorrow. This will come to the full board at the next board meeting, and between now and then, if you've got questions, you know, Dr. Van Zyl, Dr. Kraus, all you gotta do is pick up the phone. Any other questions?
I'd be happy to visit with any of you anytime if you have questions.
Okay, well, it is, what time is it? 2:49, I call this meeting adjourned. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.